our panel, please welcome. Right, we'll get stuck in straight away. Google are here a bit later. What two things would each of you like from Google and Facebook in 2020? Anna?
Money, and I suppose a more mature and evolved debate and around what a fair value exchange is around quality content within their environments and what they deliver back to us.
More Facebook than Google for you, or?
No, more Google than Facebook.
Right. And so talk a bit about sort of the differences between UK and US, because obviously you've got a very developed proposition in the US.
Well, I think that is part of the problem, that it's quite difficult to know how to engage with either Facebook or Google if like us, I think, with a truly global audience, and they want to, I think, engage on a kind of national level. And I think that's one of the interesting things that's happening at the moment, that news has moved from, and that's part of the sort of outcome of the disruption, which is you move from being national propositions to actually increasingly global propositions. And so it's sort of ironic that these incredibly global tech companies find it very difficult to engage on a global level, even though that's the reality of what we're talking about. That's the reality of the audience, it's the reality of many of the kind of biggest stories of the day, that they're transnational and they're not sort of rooted, I mean, they're not just rooted in national politics. So I think the primary discussions will inevitably be in the UK, but they're just as pertinent in the US.
Very interesting. Dominic, News UK perspective.
Well, to be fair, you could probably spend 25 minutes talking about those issues that we just raised. I think if you look at it, there's a lot of different things that we'd ask of both those platforms. But if you say two, the first one is transparency, and I think there's been a lot of government commissioned investigations into the digital ecosystem, advertising ecosystem, of which we know there is a major player or more in that, and I think that needs to be interrogated. I think some more transparency, I think, would be good to understand how their business models work, because I think on the point of value creation that I think we all do as news businesses, we add value to those platforms, both in terms of we create and enrich a lot of search. We also give calls through a lot of consumers to keep going back multiple times a day, which feeds the data pot for both Facebook and Google. And actually what we don't see as a business is that value at fair value exchange. So we create the value, but we don't, they take the value.
Simon and Anna, slightly different relationships, I'm sure, but do you have sort of comments from your end?
Yeah, so I'm gonna broaden that out slightly to Amazon as well.
Yeah.
And I think we, just a continuation for us of the positive discussions that we've had about our content on those platforms, because smart speakers particularly are really changing the makeup of audio delivery. And I think they've been constructive so far, so we would like that to continue. I would also echo Dom's point that I think from a professional and a personal perspective, I think the whole area of transparency. And I think that I think we're nearly at the point where they should come to the table with a really clear view on what they're going to do to deliver on that.
Can you be a bit more specific about what your ask is there?
Well, I think, particularly around the advertising models, and are they, I think, certainly I feel, and I'm sure other people on the panel feel as well, that the playing field is not quite level in terms of the data that they're giving out, in terms of being proprietary and their own data compared to what we have to do. So it would be specifically in that area.
Anna?
Yeah, so ITN is a bit different because we're around broadcast news, and we make ITV News and Channel 4 News and 5 News. And 2/3 of audiences say that linear broadcast news is the news they trust the most. So I would say for these platforms, it is about prominence. It is about being able to access news you can trust. And ITN services have a kite mark of quality. And I think when people are really exploring stories, being able to go to places they trust is incredibly important. So prominence and the ability to find those trusted sources.
And is ITN news footage and content sort of proliferating in social media in ways that sort of slightly beyond your control, or are you still very much in control of that IP?
Our official sites, we are in control, and actually those platforms are really important because that's where audiences want to consume content. So we do want to get our stories on there, and we have different services on those platforms, like ITV News' Rundown service, which is targeted at younger audiences. So it's absolutely vital that we're on those platforms because that's what audiences want, and it's absolutely vital that we have prominence so people know where they can go and trust news, where they can find it.
John, you're in a slightly different space in terms of how the FT sort of is more of a sort of closed app that kind of subscribers are connected to directly. You've had great success with that model. I'm sure lots of the more broader mass market players would love to get to that stage, but share sort of the next chapter of the journey that you're on.
Well, I think just quickly on this point around Google and Facebook, if I can, I think we're in a similar sense, similar boat in the same sense as Anna and Dom are. We rely very heavily on those platforms to deliver us traffic. And it seems to me that what's at the core of the friction in the relationship between news publishers and content producers and technology platforms is this somewhat subjective sense of too much value being extracted and not enough being put back. So I think Anna hits the nail exactly on the head, that what would be wonderful in the next 12 months or so is a really true participatory piece of research that says, here is how much value is extracted from content that's produced, and here's how much value goes back. And I think then you can have a grown-up conversation about whether that is an equitable relationship in an objective sense, because it seems still very subjective and to me. So that's what I would like Facebook and Google and others to
do that as an industry group, or do you have to do it individually?
I think we should do it as an industry group, and I think we should do it with those big technology platforms. I mean, you've singled out Facebook and Google, but there are others as well. And, you know, there have been some steps forward. Apple are paying for news. Facebook are paying for news. Google are talking about paying for news in France. But to Anna's point about doing that locally, I think that doesn't seem equitable to me. Again, that seems like singling out not just one country for benefit, but also a subset of publishers for benefit within that. That doesn't seem to me to be a reasonable way to invest money into a business and to create a level relationship between the participants. So that's what I would hope we would get to in the next 12 months.
Got it. There's been a lot of talk about collaboration sort of throughout the morning. There are some important initiatives on the commercial side between some of you. I think Ozone is one of the key ones. What's the latest on that initiative?
So Ozone, we're a year in existence now, significant growth. We've worked with over 70 brands. We're working with all the agencies. We are clearly very ambitious to bring on a lot more publishers, but as an initial partnership between the 4 publishers that are involved, I think we're very, very happy with the progress. Collaboration was brought up several times today, and I think it's not just about Ozone. With Ozone, I think it's fantastic, and we do have clear ambitions, you know, to actually satisfy both readers and advertisers and publishers, you know, to run a better business, you know, for advertisers to get more of their money landing in front of a consumer, and also for the reader experience to be not slowed down by all the tech that's on the page. So I think where we are going with Ozone is a really positive place for those 3, and also I think for the industry for creating competition, you know, currently that is usually resides, the money which usually resides in Google. But collaboration has to happen in all areas, and we're seeing it not just in Ozone, the publishing business. I've got 2 partners here next to me, Anna at The Guardian, obviously with Ozone, you know, and Simon here from Bauer as well, which we recently announced a joint venture with Bauer in the audio space as well. So I think, you know, echoing a lot of the themes that have come through today, collaboration is fundamental, I think, you know, for us to continue to deliver what we need to deliver in the best way possible for readers, listeners, you know, and also advertisers.
I think picking up.
So I was just going to say that there's, just to add to Dom's point, I think the whole area of collaboration, because obviously, you know, Dom's great brands and Bauer's great brands, we compete on a day-to-day basis, but we believe there's a real opportunity driven by the significant increase in IP listening and the development of audio, that we can use the first-party data that both of our companies have. And that's about working together to say, well, you know, radio, £700 million of revenue in a year, but collectively, can we work in harmony and collaboration with partners to say, well, okay, in 2 or 3 years, can we make that $1 billion by taking money out of the digital area?
Dom, talking of radio, Times Radio, very interesting initiative. Can you tell us more about it?
I think it's like a natural extension, and we've, you know, early on today, a lot of people talked about engagement and trust. And I think your first permission, you know, is from your consumers. You'll listen to what your consumers want, and where your consumers in part, you know, have engagement with you, you can say it's a proxy for trust. And when you have trust, you can use that as an opportunity to offer new ranges of services. I think if you think back to our business, which historically, just as a publishing business, you know, when we acquired the radio business, TalkSport and Virgin Radio and TalkSport 2 back in 2016, Rebecca, at the point at which we made that acquisition, was very clear that this created opportunities for our newsrooms. We've started, I guess, with podcasts, and we've seen the golden age of TV that was mentioned earlier. I think we're in the golden age of audio. Podcasts are huge. We've got Giles Corrins, No Idea. We have Redbox, and we're soon to launch Story of Our Time. So we see audio as a significant opportunity, and the next stage of that really is to then take Times Radio and launch Times Radio. It's basically trusted. It's highly valued content, and I think we have an opportunity to do that in an audio space, in the same way that we have done with our print and our digital businesses.
Anna, the Guardian's led the way in terms of sort of really putting the trust proposition very central to the brand promise and the way in which you're engaging with your supporters / members. What's the next stage of the evolution in that model, because it's getting to scale now?
It is getting to scale. I mean, the next stage is to get to 2 million. If we've got to 1 million, it's now to get to 2 million. And I think that the way we're going to do that is really internationally. And I think that's the most interesting thing about this re-establishment of value exchange with readers, which is we grew this incredible global audience, and that's one of the things that digital enabled us to do. But you couldn't realize any return on it because the return was very sort of nationally bounded by advertising. And then advertising failed to sort of follow kind of, sort of audience growth. And now, with this direct relationship and the ability to ask readers to fund your journalism and support it, you see this incredible sort of growth internationally. And really interestingly, the fastest place that we're seeing growth at the moment is in Europe. And so I think this sort of, having seen America and Australia, now there are readers all over Europe who are looking for a second news source other than their national one, and they're comfortable with that being in English. And you're seeing not only incredible growth in readership and listenership, but also in the willingness to financially support it. So I think that's the next stage.
But both for ITN and The Guardian, essentially, funding the journalism is at best, sort of break-even type of proposition. We are in pretty new territory in terms of how journalism is going to be funded. Obviously, your model is very robust because you have the trust, and that's kind of giving The Guardian security. So in terms of sort of where next, I mean, broke even last year. Is it possible to generate a surplus to sort of invest further in journalism in the future, or are you still going to rely on the trust to sort of support that? And in a sort of similar way, ITN obviously has its own stakeholders. I'm just thinking about how clear and distinctive the journalism is, but how the funding model ultimately will need to be supported.
Well, I think they're actually intimately connected. I mean, we know that the reason that people are willing to support our journalism is because the quality of the journalism, which I think is connected to the distinctiveness, our values and our independence. And it's a really big driver for people being willing to give us money is the fact that we can demonstrably show that we're independent. So the fact that we're funded by the trust is a privilege, but it also allows us to ask, I think, our readers and for our readers to trust us with their money. So while I think we would always want to be as successful from a kind of commercial point of view as we possibly can be, it would only be to invest back in the journalism, and it would only be to maintain what it is the readers are funding, by giving us their money.
And for ITN, it's a topic that's come up a lot today. It's the future of public service broadcasting, because that is what funds the news services that we make. And, I think a key word for me is also around plurality. And we heard about that earlier as well. And ITN does 3 very different news services for 3 very different sets of audiences. And I think what's really robust about news in the UK is you do have those different voices with the BBC, with Sky, and with ITN. And I think, together we all want to flourish. I want a strong BBC News. I want a strong Sky News. The other thing for ITN is, as well as doing news, we've diversified into other types of content. So we've got a big TV production business, and that enables us to grow the business and to think about what we can offer new platforms in terms of topical, current affairs and factual programming. So there are lots of interesting opportunities to explore.
I'm going to throw it to the audience in a moment, but John, just go back to you. Tell us a little bit more about how your subscription for digital versus print, the transition, where it sits today, where it will be in the next 3 years. And then I would just also quite intrigued about sort of the shift that's occurred since you've effectively had a new owner over the last few years, and sort of, in terms of investing in the future of the journalism?
Well, they've been, I have to say, and genuinely speaking, a brilliant owner. They have kept true to their promise. They've not got themselves involved in the newsroom at all. There's been lots of great knowledge sharing between the newsrooms and between the business side as well. But they've absolutely stayed true to that promise, and that was obviously key to us when we were moving away from Pearson, that we retained that neutrality and independence in the newsroom. And they've invested for the long term with us as well, which is fantastic, particularly given that advertising markets can be a fairly fickle friend. And as we're seeing at the moment, it doesn't take too much to get them rocking down again. So they've stayed true to that and continue to invest in us for the long term. We did hit a really major milestone last year of 1 million paying readers of the FT. And they've got a lot of headlines. I think what the headlines didn't quite speak to, though, is that that's just what we call pink FT, so Financial Times newspaper, and predominantly FT.com. And if you look across all of the FT group, our total paying readership now is approaching 1.4 million readers. And critically within that, 90% of that is on a recurring revenue basis, on a subscription basis, fundamentally. And that's really important for us when we talk about the sustainability of the newsroom and the sustainability of the brand. So the next step for us, slightly different from Anna, it's not to reach 2 million. We've hit that volume target, if you like. Now the pursuit is about value. So the shift in emphasis in the business is value before volume. Volume will be a consequence of the activities that drive value. And we want the questions that we're asking ourselves in the business to be not how many subscribers did we acquire last week, which is where we've been obsessed, I think, for the last few years, and rightly so, but how much value did we create from that subscriber base. So that's quite a key shift.
And what's the main metric for value that you would use?
So lifetime value is the North Star for the business, and then within that we're looking most closely at how deeply our users are engaged. So I would rather have 500,000 deeply engaged users, and we measure every single user with an individual engagement score that's a mix of recency and frequency and the volume of content. There's a square root in the calculation as well. For some reason I can't understand, but my chief data officer insists is necessary. But that degree of understanding about the engagement of the reader is really key to the business model. So we're after more engagement than we are the size of the audience overall, if you like.
Got it. Right, hands up for questions from the floor, please. Let's, yes. Gentleman in the centre there, please get a microphone quickly. Thank you.
My name is Martin Lote. I'm from the Propeller Group. I'd just like to go back to the earlier point about the value exchange question with Facebook and Google. Perhaps some of the senior publishers can enlighten us a little bit, because there's some very senior commercial officers on the panel who presumably are not averse to walking away from deals where there isn't a fair value exchange and they can't get what they want. So could you just explain, with all the resources at your disposal, if Facebook and Google are not playing on a level playing field, why you just don't play ball with them or make life a lot more difficult?
What do you mean by that, make life a lot more difficult?
To what extent, assuming they're operating within the law, can they take your assets if you don't want them to enrich their search results, for example?
I think they're like frenemies. So, on one level, we don't see a fair value exchange, but on another level, and we've talked about, it was mentioned earlier by John, ultimately we have to distribute our content. You can write a fantastic story, but if no one sees it, it's valueless. So, you have...
value exchange?
Sorry?
So
it's not necessarily a fair exchange, because, what happens is, they extract, that data that they get from that story, and actually that story, keeps people coming back to their platforms. It enriches search, which they make money from. And I think it's understanding that and thinking where that fair value exchange is. Yes, on one level is distribution platform, but equally, if we enrich another part of that business, then surely we should be getting a value for that as well. So all that happens is that publishers oscillate between, how much we give, versus how much we should give, rather than saying you're out altogether. And I think that's the balance that we're trying to work with. And ultimately, when you're frenemies, which I know coined by Martin Sorrell many years ago, but when you are operating on a frenemy basis, you do need each other. It's just a recognition of whether that is currently balanced, and it isn't at the moment.
Anna, can I bring you in?
I think it also comes back to the idea of fair. So there is a value exchange. The question is it fair? And transparency, which is, At the moment, usually the argument goes that the value exchange is fair because they deliver traffic and you can monetize that traffic, and they put a financial value on the monetization of the traffic. I think that the data that that's based on is old, and I think the methodology that you direct traffic, which is well-qualified traffic, and that then becomes revenue, is now not really, that sort of causality and connection is now not sort of holding true anymore. So I think it is about having a data-led discussion where you do the right research on what is the kind of actual value exchange, and that becomes the basis of which you have a negotiation, and a sort of, and it is transparent and it is fair.
Other question? Yes, gentleman just here, with his hand up.
Hello, Dan Eisen from Deloitte. Thank you for that panel discussion. It's the one session we've got through without mentioning the virus, coronavirus. I'm just interested in giving us a glimpse, which we touched on, a glimpse into your businesses as purveyors of information and news and to the public, as to anything that you've seen change in your operations, if you like, over the last few days, either in news gathering, the journalistic checking, fact-checking, or publishing. Maybe to start with you, Anna.
Well, I mean, I think everyone will talk about the various ways that it's affecting us. One thing we are seeing, which I think is fascinating, is we've seen the highest days of traffic we've ever seen. And that's both in sort of scale of audience, but also in terms of engagement and in terms of regularity. So I think what that says is that, well, A, it's a truly global story, not a great surprise, but B, people are truly seeking trusted and reliable sources, and I think that's probably what you're seeing in the dynamics of behaviour, that everybody has questions, and they are turning, obviously, digitally to answer those questions, and they're very much navigating to trusted sources to find those answers. And I think that's very revealing, and I think that's also important. I think now we have a responsibility to make sure that we can deliver that to them.
Simon?
Yeah, I think the area of trust is really interesting, because we've seen lots of different perceptions and views on that over the last few days. Radio's, any research will tell you, is the most trusted medium. European Commission says that. I think our 22 local stations have been working and almost a barometer of local feeling. So we do get that direct engagement with local communities and how they're feeling about this. And that's just a really interesting view for us.
Emma?
Yeah, I mean, just to agree with those points, I think it's times like these people do go to news services they really trust. And I think all the services at ITN have got the tone just right in terms of being informative and calm and giving the right sort of information. So I completely agree, yeah.
Good. John, any final comments?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Very good. Well, we're bang on time. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you.